up next, Webster.
Good morning. Premier Bennett came out with these big guns last night, and the effects of them could lead to a confrontation between Labour and the government. They could lead to an election. Very simply put, what he did was this. Effective now, he froze wages at 10%, expenditures at 12%, froze civil service, senior salaries. And here's the reaction we got from two guys deeply involved.
His government got us into this mess, and all of a sudden we've all got to get our shoulders to the wheel to bail him out. The hell with him as far as I'm concerned.
I think the Premier's providing the kind of leadership that people have been looking for from government for a long time. And it took a lot of political courage to do it.
The battle lines obviously are clearly drawn between the Employers' Council and the BC Federation of Labour. Here is the spokesman for the government, the man with the party line this morning, and presumably all the details of the authority of their actions, is Bob McClelland, Minister of Energy. Now, in case you get a headache after 45 minutes of this, we've brought in a clinical expert, clinical psychologist, Dr. Kohlenberg from Seattle, who's going to cure your headache for you. But up on the wage controls, etc., after the break.
During the next 2-year period, permanent guidelines will be developed to limit the size of the public sector in our province.
The initials you'd better learn to know are CSB, Compensation Stabilization Program. What Bennett, and you'll hear him do it, said last night was 10% on wage limits, up or down 2%, plus 2% for productivity. From 8 to 14%, you might say, is possible under this in certain circumstances. But let's have Premier Bennett himself explain in short form what he has done.
The government will introduce, at the next sitting of the legislature, a program limiting public sector spending in British Columbia. The program will put in place a 12% upper limit on expenditures in 1982-1983 and will apply to all public bodies that spend your tax dollars, including the following: municipal and local governments, post-secondary educational institutions, school boards, hospitals, private societies performing public functions, and of course, the provincial government itself. During the next 2-year period, permanent guidelines will be developed to limit the size of the public sector in our province. The government will also introduce a Compensation Stabilization Program to establish guidelines for all persons working in the public sector. These guidelines will be effective immediately and remain in force for a 2-year period, with an appropriate phase-out to ensure equitable and consistent treatment of all groups working for Crown corporations, school boards, educational institutions, hospitals, municipal and local governments, and private societies performing public functions. The guidelines will be set at 10% for 1982-83, plus or minus 2%, to take into account factors such as past experience, skill shortages, and historical relationships. And an additional 2% available to reward increases in productivity. collective bargaining in the public sector will take place in the normal manner, but the Commissioner will have the power to roll back excessive settlements. The government believes that it would be neither fair nor equitable to ask those working in the public sector to bear any sacrifice that we ourselves are not prepared to accept. Accordingly, guidelines dealing with compensation to elected representatives will be dealt with at the next sitting of the legislature. And the government expects that elected officials at other levels will do likewise. Senior executives of Crown corporations, hospitals, municipal managers, school administrators, and senior public servants will be included in this program, but will have stricter guidelines applied. Pending completion of a report on relationships among these positions, all salaries in these areas will remain frozen.
Premier Bennett, of course, was speaking from his carefully prepared script, ably assisted by the big blue machine boys in the back room. Dave Barrett was standing by in the BC TV newsroom for his instant reaction. First news he had was when he saw Bennett.
We've seen tonight a demonstration of, essentially, in my opinion, a public relations performance. But there has been no restraint shown by the government itself, and in particularly the Premier's office. And then to announce that everybody cut back a bit in one notch in their belt, while his office has expanded about 4 notches, is difficult to sell. I think everybody wants restraint. Everybody wants caution. On the other side of the coin, everybody wants some progress, some hope for the future. None of that was announced tonight. We got a new form of Ottawa bashing, a new form of municipality bashing, but I'm all right, Jack, for the provincial government. Frankly, it is a disappointment, and I had hoped that there would be some substance in tonight's statements, but there really wasn't much.
There were promises of economic recovery. He's talked about his talks with the Prime Minister about bonds.
Promises about continuing talks do not warrant 15 minutes of prime time on television. If a politician can promise you anything with absolute certainty, is that he'll have continuing talks on a problem. Now, to announce that as a major thing denies the very essence of politics and politicians' roles. We talk, talk, talk. Tonight we hoped there would be some performance, and to get an announcement there would be more talking going on between his much maligned Ottawa for hoped-for programs is not worthy of focusing the whole province's attention. What is going to happen as a response to this, when a very serious statement needs to be made and must be made, very little attention will be paid to it because of, I think, a touch of cynicism tonight.
Can I ask you, given the need for restraint, and I haven't heard you say there is need for restraint, could you suggest something?
Yes, the first place to start would have been with the Premier's office. Cancel that furniture. Demonstrate that he means business. Cut some of his staff. Roll back those huge increases. Stop hiring advisors who are involved very much in producing images around government in British Columbia, which is really alien to our history. Former premiers in this province did not hire outside advisors to go through this kind of performance. The demonstration of restraint, caution, and prudence always was at the premier's level. That's gone. Along with that, everybody wants restraint, but they want some examples and leadership, not just jargon, not just hope-for wishes, but some leadership. That was sadly lacking tonight.
Premier Bennett didn't mention the furniture, but he made it obvious he's going to roll back the good increase given to the MLAs last time, which will cut both his and Barrett's money. Then in the studio, we had 2 key men, and you'll see them, one from management, one from Labour. How did they react to Bennett?
I think the Premier's providing the kind of leadership that people have been looking for from government for a long time. And it took a lot of political courage to do it. He stepped into the Labour scene and established a series of guidelines. There's room to maneuver. There's room for collective bargaining there. The bottom seems to be 8%. The top seems to be 14%. And if anything, those are generous. They're certainly, as you look at them, beyond the inflation level. He's done the second thing which is necessary, and he's moved into the whole governmental setup in the province, municipalities, hospitals, school districts, for example, and is establishing a whole framework to bring these, to bring the financial aspects of these operations into line with what I think people have been looking for a long time. I'm very positive about it.
It's going to be retroactive legislation in some ways, as he explained at the press conference, as they come up. But the Compensation Stabilization man, Ed Pick, will be able to cut back anything above the maximum allowed after what he calls normal collective bargaining. Do you think this will lead to real labor discontent and strife among our organized public sector employees who are very powerful indeed?
I think there's going to be a high degree of debate about this thing, but it is about time we had some leadership on it and somebody made up their mind as to where they were going.
Do you think that this is a prelude to an early election?
Don't ask me, ask the Premier.
Now I'll turn to Jim Kinnaird, who is the president of the BC Federation of Labour. Mr. Kinnaird, your instant wisdom or reaction to these fairly complex announcements?
Well, I think, first of all, Jack, my reaction is one of cynicism. We've seen this whole scene in the past with Trudeau when he went to the national media to appeal for national resolve to get behind the state of the economy. They introduced a wage and price control program with Jean-Luc Pépin to lead it. And we're back again, we're looking at the provincial level. Wage and price controls don't work. They proved to be a disaster at the national level. And here we've got a Mr. Ed Peck set up as a commissioner, and the Premier is saying that one of the big factors, the cause of the problems in our economy is public sector spending and public sector employees. Well, public sector employees are going to be pretty unhappy with them under these circumstances. He's responding on the question of those huge tax increases to house owners. That's a reaction to the grassroots opposition, and people were mad at him and mad at the government. I am cynical, completely cynical with the pitch that he's making. And yes, I'd like to see the economy back on the road. I'd like to see employment, full employment. But, you know, I think his government got us into this mess, and all of a sudden we've all got to get our shoulders to the wheel to bail him out. To hell with him as far as I'm concerned.
Say that again?
Yes, to hell with him.
You're saying this is a deliberate challenge to the BC Government Employees Union, especially, the biggest public sector union. And do you see what he says tonight? And he promises legislation effective now for 2 years. And let's take the average figure of 10%. Is this a deliberate move, not only to cut public spending, but to keep the BC GEU from what they regard as their catch-up?
Look, first of all, I think it's the prelude to an election. Everyone said, don't take on the government employees, don't get into wage and price controls, don't do that or else you're into confrontation with Labour. And he's doing exactly that. And he's doing it in that cynical way and appealing to everyone to get behind the wheel and save the province. No, I'm sorry, I'm just too cynical about that.
Do you regard it as particularly arrogant or arbitrary because you have not in any way, shape or form been consulted?
Consulted, of course there's been no consultation with Labour. He's picked a commissioner, someone who's had a fair reputation in the province of British Columbia in the field of industrial relations. That's a complete surprise to us. A new commissioner with the powers to roll back, that's exactly what Jean-Luc Pépin had. And, you know, he proved to be a disaster as well.
But he has restricted his promised controls to the public sector. Now, obviously, he's not going to touch the IWA, the pulp workers, or anyone else, right?
The private sector's in a disaster at the present moment. The forest industry people are out of work, and that's government policy that put us that way.
His government policy?
His government's policy, of course it is.
Mr. Hamilton.
Well, he said, and I certainly agree with him, it is not the government's policy. We're facing a downturn, a very serious condition in the United States economy. We're facing a very serious condition in the Canadian economy. And British Columbia, as an economy, is doing somewhat better than either of these countries. One of the things which impressed me about the Premier tonight in the program is that he has avoided the temptation to engage in an outpouring of public funds for a lot of make-work projects of one kind or another, which really don't achieve very much and leave a legacy of further economic dislocation behind them. I think he's giving the kind of leadership here that the public, now we've got to turn to the private sector and ask, just how are we going to live up to it or not?
But you're a practical man, Mr. Hamilton. When he says, as he said tonight, a 10%, forget the senior executive salaries, nobody will have any great sympathy for them perhaps, but when he puts it on the line, in the nose of the BC GEU negotiations, 10% for 1982, 10% for 1983, as I understood his speech, is that not raising the gauntlet directly to the pride and the power of the trade unions and the public sector and liable to lead to considerable unrest?
I would imagine it would. It is very definitely a challenge. He's taken a position, staked out a position, and let me add this, that nobody likes the idea of controls or regulation in the private sector at all. But at some point, somebody had to establish guidelines, give some kind of targets, so that people could begin to negotiate to that end.
In one word, therefore, you have, in the main, approbation for Bennett's guts.
Definitely.
Mr. Kinnaird, I'll let you have the last word.
Well, I think I'd go after his guts for doing this sort of thing. Here he's put our economy into the state it's in right now. Bennett was a hawk in Ottawa. Trudeau was a hawk in Ottawa on wage and price controls. None of the rest of the provinces are getting wage and price controls, and he comes back in here and he's trying to nail us here in British Columbia. We'll give him a confrontation on this one.
There's a blunt statement from Jim Kinnaird. I have in the studio this morning Bob McClelland, Minister of Energy. He's going to give us the party line. He's the government spokesman for you and me this morning. I'll have at him, and so will you. After the break. Bob McClelland is the Minister of Energy and various other things in the Social Credit Government of Victoria. I would like to know first, Mr. McClelland, what authority did the Premier have to announce this last night and say, effective now? As far as restraint and spending is concerned, he can do that in his budget. But what about the wage controls, and they are controls, effective now?
Yes, Jack, you're right about the cuts in spending under the Financial Administration Act and other finance acts. We can take those measures right now. We're doing essentially what other governments do, particularly the federal government, in some monetary measures. We're announcing the measures, effective now, and we will introduce legislation which will ratify them as soon as the House goes back into session.
Which raises a very interesting point. We haven't even got a date for the House to sit, and here we are in the middle of Feb.
Yes, the House will sit as soon as the budget is ready. The Premier, I'm sure, will be announcing that shortly. We generally sit sometime in March, has been the practice, and I would expect that, give or take some time, that will be the practice again this year.
So it's going to be a legislation backdated until the time of the Premier's announcement. Now,
yes.
How is that going to work? Oh, by the way, Bill Hamilton made a very astute remark there. Let's go over the wage controls. Now, do you agree with me these are controls?
Yes, they're guidelines, controls, sure.
Guidelines aren't the same as controls. Are these guidelines or controls?
Well, they will control the amount of increase that any public sector employer can get. It's a control, sure.
10%.
10% is the basic guideline, yes.
Every public sector employee, including BC Hydro?
Yes.
In the province of British Columbia?
Yes.
10% for each of 2 years?
No, it'll be 10% for the first year. It'll be reviewed the second year. But it's 10% at this point, and I think we've said that we will review it each year as the years go by. You've got to have some relationship to the inflation index, and that's the way we'll be looking at it.
Well, let's just go back a step.
It won't be the government that will be looking at it necessarily. It would probably be a recommendation from the Commissioner, Mr. Peck, would look at the statistics and make recommendations.
On the other hand, unless my ears are giving out, the 12% increase in public spending is firm for 2 years.
Yes.
So that'd be 12 to...
Well, Jack, I'd just like to make that clear too, that the public sector expenditure program is not a 2-year program. It's a permanent program which will be in place and will be reviewed each year as well. But the first stage of that permanent program is 2 years.
And that's 12%?
Yes.
And if they get 10% wage increases, that means we can look down the road to jobs being left vacant by attrition and squeeze on many government programs.
Well, I'm not so sure that we will have to do that. If we're successful in bringing down the inflation rate, Jack, it automatically moves us into an area of being able to handle our social programs particularly. The problem we have right now is with inflation out of control and spending in many ways out of control, that threatens the social programs. And what we're trying to do is get out from under that threat.
All right, pretend I'm John Fryer for the moment. When he comes up for his negotiations now, the Premier had the gall to say that collective bargaining will continue as normal. I mean, that's just not right, is it?
Collective bargaining will continue, Jack. The only difference is that there will be some guidelines under which that collective bargaining can take place, upper limits.
Upper limits. So the government negotiators will go in quite clear that the maximum to any sector will be how much?
The maximum is 10%. There will be 2% on either side of that for certain circumstances. It'll be up to the Commissioner to make those decisions.
In other words, perhaps an area, we'll talk about equal pay for equal work just for a moment, perhaps an area where people are behind that can go as high as 12%.
Yes, that's right. There may be that area. There may be a requirement, for instance, in a northern community to have an extra 2% to keep nurses or something like that.
Okay, and those who are well up, you might say, in the inflation standards, could receive as little as 8%.
Yes, that's correct. The Commissioner will have the power to set that limit at 8 rather than 10 or 9.
Well, one thing baffles me there. It says 10% give or take 2, right? And then it says 2% for productivity. What productivity is in a provincial government?
Well, I think that would probably be maybe better described as special circumstances and productivity. I don't know how the Commissioner will look at that, but when we were discussing the program with the Commissioner, he felt it was important for him to have a little bit of flexibility. If there were very special circumstances that he could move in that area, he thinks that extra 2%, and it may never be used, it would give him the chance to be more fair, more equitable under very special circumstances. And I don't know when he might want to use that.
In other words, taking it very broadly, therefore, when negotiations carry on under this Compensation Stabilization Program, normal negotiating, so-called, the range for the employee or the union local runs from 8 to 14% possible top maximum. Is that right?
Yeah, the 14% would be very unusual, I would think, depending on how the Commissioner views the individual case. It would be on an individual basis, that further 2%. The other is based on pretty general guidelines, which the Commissioner will have some difficulty, I would think, establishing. It'll be a pretty complicated job.
Ed Peck, as I recall, is a man with a good reputation as an arbitrator, negotiator, whatever. But he's from the management side, is he not, of the Labour Board?
Yes, he came in originally on the management side. However, I think that if you looked around and asked both sides in this province what they think of Ed Peck, I think they would say that he has been a very fair, very honest, very straightforward labour arbitrator in the British Columbia.
Okay, so negotiations will go ahead. That's if the BCGEU will even talk to you, by the way. And then if it gets out of line, Peck will step in with power to roll back.
Following the passage of the legislation, yes.
Will there be any appeal against Peck and his rollback authority?
I wouldn't expect so, Jack. He'll have that authority under legislation.
Under legislation.
Yeah.
More with Bob McClelland on the government's package of salary freezes, guidelines and expenditure freezes and control of the sides of the public sector, which is almost impossible, I should imagine, after the break. Now, there was a very vague thing from Premier Bennett last night about something, within 2 weeks, announced policies to limit tax increases for homeowners. Now, what the devil does that mean? Does that mean that you are going to pay more out of general revenue for school costs? So you're going to vastly increase the mill rate, the government share of education costs?
Well, I wish I could answer you specifically, Jack, but I can't. But there will be an announcement by the Premier and I would presume the Minister of Education within that 2-week period. And the Premier has simply committed us to making sure that there aren't horrendous increases in municipal taxes, both school and municipal this year.
I thought you were broke.
Well, there are times, Jack, when you must find a little extra money from wherever you can to bring that kind of relief, and this is one of those times, particularly following the wild fluctuation in assessment that's happened in the last little while. We have to rearrange some of our priorities and put the money in the places where it'll do the most good for the most people.
Well, you won't tell me, but just to speculate, it could be a big increase in the provincial government's contribution or share of basic education costs. Or it could be an increase in the homeowner grant specifically to apply against school taxes, couldn't it?
Could be.
What other ways could it be done?
Oh, I think there's a lot of ways in which taxation can be approached, Jack, and I don't really want to get into the speculation. It isn't my area of expertise, and it's not my area of responsibility, which is most important. But there will be an announcement, and it will be within 2 weeks, and it will be a direct aid to the homeowners of this province faced with the possibility of additional and huge tax increases.
Well, there was a little piece of double talk, with all due respect to the Premier and yourself last night, when you talked about non-inflationary programs to stimulate job-creating investments. And what the devil is that?
Well, there could be 2 or 3 areas there, Jack, and including some of the areas in which we're already involved. There's the port development at Prince Rupert, which is going ahead rapidly. There's the Northeast Coal development. There's BC Place, which is underway now, which is creating a lot of construction jobs in the hard-pressed Lower Mainland. There are the areas of opportunities coming up for further processing of our natural gas in the province. We have, and the Premier made some mention of that last night, we have underway an allocation process for our natural gas, which will eventually see millions and millions of dollars of capital development and construction in the province for those kind of processes. So those are underway. And,
you're talking about the plant.
Talking about plants, Jack. We have 13 proposals put forward for the use of our natural gas, and we'll be making decisions on those before this summer.
Well, I'm going to ask you a question based on Marjorie Nichols' columns and conversations with Ed Phillips. Are you preparing to sell the natural gas section of BC Hydro, and in view of the way some of you answer questions, I must make it broad, to inland natural gas, or in any way to separate it from BC Hydro?
That's never been discussed by Cabinet at any time, as long as I have been the Minister of Energy, and that's over 2 years. There was, as you will remember, a Crown Corporations committee report some, I guess, 3 years ago or more that suggested that there should be a separate Crown Corporation for BC Hydro's gas division. Government's never acted on that. We've never discussed it. I have never recommended it.
In other words, you haven't thought of a cute way to raise $500 million for the Treasury?
Well, you know, it's interesting that Marjorie should say that. I don't know where we would get the $500 million anyway, because if any government sold off those assets of BC Hydro, those assets would not belong to the government. Hydro has some trusteed bonds and bondholders who would demand that those assets go to Hydro, and they'd have to go to Hydro, so we would not get them.
And in any case, just to be quite chatty about it, you're in such a mess over brick that you wouldn't do anything like that with BC Natural Gas.
Well, it's never been discussed.
Okay.
I guess Marjorie had a quiet little chat with Ed Phillips and came out with a column. I've never discussed it with my colleagues in government.
Didn't you discuss it with Dave Phillips?
Phillips discussed it with me. You know, I've had several people. I get people into my office every day with all kinds of schemes.
But with all the doom and gloom from the Premier and from Curtis, you know, and the word that all your special funds, $700 to $1 billion down the tube, I would expect you to do anything to raise a quick buck.
Yeah, well, we need to raise money in practical ways, but I've said that if that was even a possibility, it would raise no money for the provincial government.
Next question, and this is right in your own area. I half expected you last night to come out flat-footed, the Premier, a la Peckford, and say, "To hell with Ottawa. We want the offshore oil rigs here." What are you talking about when you say acceleration of federal-provincial discussion of offshore resources? What's that about?
Well, if you recall, Jack, when the energy agreement was signed between the Premier and the Prime Minister some months ago, part of that agreement was that we would get into negotiation on offshore development. British Columbia has taken a strong position. However, it's a different position from that of the other eastern provinces, because we have a court decision which tells us that our inland waters are in provincial jurisdiction.
The Gulf is yours.
That's correct. Well, we consider that to be inland waters, and any offshore exploration which will probably take place will take place in inland waters. So we're going into those negotiations, I think, from a position of strength. The Premier has obviously discussed this matter with the Prime Minister, and I expect that I will get marching orders to move those negotiations up, and I would expect we'll have to arrange for a meeting with McClelland as quickly as possible.
It looks to me, seeing Kinnaird's reaction, that you are aiming for a confrontation with Labour although you've given them a little leeway, the 8 to 14, 10% freeze, you might say, and that you are gearing up for an election on this particular tough issue at a time when the polls show you sliding badly?
No, I think the Premier has said quite clearly that we're not looking for an election. I think his comment was that, you know, if there's to be an election, it could come next year. We do not want a confrontation. I think that, you know, that we're hurting right now in British Columbia like every other jurisdiction in North America. We have thousands of people out of work because of the slump in lumber sales particularly, and the slumps in the oil and gas development and areas like that. And those people are feeling the restraint in a very, very meaningful way. They're sitting at home out of work. All we're saying is that there's a degree of comfort in the public sector. And I'm not just talking about civil servants now, but the public sector, because they don't get the same kind of cruel treatment of immediate layoffs and loss of wages that the private sector does. So what we're saying is that the public sector must take part in this restraint as well, and this is the only way we can see to have them take part.
One last question for me for the moment, and that simply is, at what level will the civil service and public officials' salaries be frozen? Is there a magic number? $50,000?
No, I haven't seen any numbers. We'll be working that out, and but I think it's the best way I can explain it would be at the senior management level.
In that case, it will be probably $60,000 and above.
I would expect that's a fair, you know, a figure somewhere around there, Jack. But there may be, we have senior managers who don't make that much money, and I think that we want to look at those as well. We want to look at the whole relationship between a guy, I'm told, who works for the Greater Vancouver Regional District and gets $140,000 or $150,000 a year, and a senior deputy minister who may only get $55,000 a year.
Or $65,000.
Or $65,000.
Plus 15% megs.
That's correct.
Plus a couple of clubs maybe here and there.
I don't think we give clubs in the provincial government, but the public sector certainly does have many of those benefits.
I can't resist this about my good friend, Mr. Kinsella. We're so happy with Mr. Kinsella. Does he get credit cards to go out and charge things with? Will they take away Kinsella's credit cards?
No, I think that's, I haven't seen that, but I know what you're talking about. It's a simple way in which government employees can pay for their own expenses on their own trips for government business, and there's not much wrong with that, I don't think, Jack.
Davey was dead on about the furniture.
Well, that's a red herring, Jack.
No, it's not a red herring.
Sure it is.
MLA's salary has got to be cut back. You should be showing leadership.
Yes, and the Premier has said that we will show leadership in that area, and in every other area as well.
I want to see folding chairs in the Premier's office.
Well, we'll see if we can get you some birch bark picnic tables and...
Not a bad idea. Your calls to Bob McClelland, speaking for the Government of British Columbia, after the break. Bob McClelland must know the answer to this question. Must you get paid?
It's somewhere in the neighborhood of $75,000.
Somewhere in the neighborhood.
I could add it up for you. I have it here somewhere.
Let me see it.
There it is. It's.
I'll read it out. I can do it more lucidly than you
okay.
can. Oh, it's a bit complicated, isn't it?
Not really.
Well, you get more than $34,353.
No, that's the minister's salary, Jack, and this is the MLA's salary.
Oh, so you get...
So you get 34 and 43.
$34,353. And where's your MLA salary? $43,977. $78,330. Plus, do you get any? Oh, free dental, of course.
We get dental and medical care plans. We
cars.
Government car, yes.
And driver?
No.
No driver?
No driver, Jack. I wouldn't be seen dead with a driver driving me around.
Does that include your increase, 78,330?
Yes, that's the latest figure, yes.
And how much do you expect that to be cut back? 12%?
Jack, I don't know what we'll do. It'll be a legislative responsibility. Every MLA's got to take part in it, but there will be adjustments, and that's all I can say.
Under the parliamentary system of democracy, a majority can do as it wills. It would seem to me he's going to cut back the 11.9% that you got just recently. So that'll knock you off.
All I can say is the Premier said that he wouldn't ask anyone to do what we wouldn't do and more, and so we will do more than we're asking the rest of the people to do.
Okay, calls to Bob McClelland. Go ahead to the minister, please.
Mr. McClelland.
Yes, sir.
I would like to know exactly what you what the government plans to do with the coal and how much of a cutback is going to be in your salary and the Premier's salary?
Well, we've done that already. I think about 11.9%. Have you got enough money to go through with the Northeast coal deal?
Oh, yes, of course. The Northeast Coal program is underway and will continue. It's an important job-creating project, and it will create thousands of jobs in all sectors of British Columbia.
But there is more than $1 billion of public money going into the Northeast coal development, building the infrastructure, railways, and this and that, right?
Railway, town site, port development, that includes federal money as well. I'm not sure of the
Total
exact
is
amounts, but
$1.1 billion.
it's around $1 billion. Most of it fully recoverable from the sale of coal.
What do you
Special
think
surcharges.
Let me ask this caller, what do you think of the wage controls?
I don't like them because of Trudeau did the same thing, and now we're getting it shoved down our throats again. No thanks. I go with Kinnaird. Cut Bennett right off. Get him out of office right now.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Go ahead, please, to Bob McClelland.
Good morning, Mr. Webster. Mr. McClelland?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
The previous caller touched on the coal situation. I just wonder, as you being the energy minister, is it not possible to process the coal right in British Columbia? The United States has developed a technology.
No, we're not getting into that this morning. We're dealing with the wage and price restraints, and you're committed to sell, I forget how many million tons from Southeast and Northeast coal.
All right.
No, I'm not going into that. I want your views on the wage controls.
Okay, Mr. McClelland, I listened to Premier Bennett's announcement last night, and, you know, I've been off work for a month now. I lost my job, and I have 4 kids to support and a wife. I have to make mortgage payments. I have no income. Is there any way that I can cut back tightening the belt one more notch?
I didn't catch the last.
He's out of work. He's got 4
Yes,
kids.
I
In what way is he supposed to tighten his belt by a notch?
No, well, I think, sir, if you recall what the Premier said, I think that's exactly the point that he made, is that there are people in the private sector, like yourself, who are out of work, who are suffering, who are taking the effects of inflation and high interest rates. The public service is cushioned and comforted in some ways from the kind of thing that you're suffering right now, and we're saying that we all must bear some of that cost of inflation and high interest rates, and this is the only area under which we have direct control, and so that's what we're looking to try and restrain as well. So hopefully, if it works, it will help to get you back to work.
Mr. McClelland, when your government took power, you were boasting about some extra money being in a kitty. And now you've been in power for some years. Why is that the government let the situation deteriorate?
Okay, a simple answer, please, Bob.
Yeah, well, there are still some special funds available which are earmarked for special projects in the province, and we have been spending surpluses from the province to develop things like BC Place, Northeast Coal, and others in order to stimulate the economy and employment.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, hi, Jack. Bob, I wonder, are you guys going to guarantee that for the hydro rates aren't going to go up over the 12%?
Well, I can't guarantee that the rates won't go up, but I would assume that it will help to lower the need for increased hydro rates if public spending is restrained as well as ours.
So technically what you're telling us is that that everybody down here at the bottom level of this poll has to keep their wages down to 10%, but hydro rates can go up 30 or 40%, well, just like my mortgage has gone up.
Sir, if the program is successful in controlling public spending, then I would expect that it would also have an impact on other areas such as prices, such as rates for various public bodies. It would have to reflect in those areas.
But you'll be practical and admit, of course, that we've gone up 18% right now this year in hydro rates.
And ICBC rates.
And and you've got to admit that you slapped many, I think it's $100 million through on that, forgive the expression, phony water tax right back into the Treasury.
Well, it's not a phony water tax, Jack. You know, we've charged for the use of our water to the people of British Columbia at a very low rate for too many years.
But the hydro doesn't get that money.
Well, no, the government should get that money, as a matter of fact. The same as we get royalties from natural gas, the same as we get royalties from oil, same as we get royalties from coal. Water is, I think, our most precious resource, and the one which should be returning to the people of British Columbia, the opportunities that it can give in social programs,
Of course,
health,
but
welfare.
we don't like to see our hydro rates go up 18% because you need 100 million out the back door.
Well, the reason we need 100 million, Jack, is to pay for the increases in health costs and the increases in welfare costs and the increases in policing costs, and those are services that you and I get directly from the use of those tax monies.
Now, you are Minister of Health. This is going to make a very tight squeeze on hospitals. Already there are 200 job vacancies unfilled at the General by attrition, 46 layoff notices at the Columbian, cutbacks in operating times, outpatient treatments considerably restricted in the big hospital. How bad is it going to get?
No, I always hated the word cutback when I was Minister of Health, and I still don't like it, Jack, because, you know, let's just take that position. When I was Minister of Health, I think that the total percentage of the provincial budget for health care at that time was 26%, or 25, one of the two. Today, which is only less than 3 years later, it is 31 or 32% of the total budget. Now, you and I would, I think, both have to agree that we've got to get a handle on that somehow.
Yeah, one doesn't have really a great faith in the overall bureaucracy of the healthcare
It's
system.
a tough area to get the handle on it. Every government in Canada certainly has had agonized over how they control healthcare costs.
Okay, before I take the break, I want to lay down some rules. Don't be sidetracked. I want your frank, blunt, honest opinions, approbation or criticism of what Bennett did last night. 12% public spending, 10% wage controls, and what else? These are the two main things in the whole budget as far as the man in the street is concerned. Now, don't get off the point. Have at him after the break. Go ahead to Bob McClelland.
Yes, Mr. McClelland, I think the federal government should amend the criminal code to deal with people such as Mr. Bennett who bring in these wage controls while gas and rents, etc., keep going up by a much higher percentage. And I'd like to know, since your government advocates so much restraint, has your government sent a delegation to the CRTC hearings regarding BC Tel increases, which they want to up the rates somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. And another point, with the cost of housing so expensive, your government voted for the BC Savings and Trust Corporation way back, and apparently the Finance Committee and BC Credit Union had a report that you've kept secret regarding how to implement BC Savings.
Fair enough, we got the point. Are you going to do anything with savings and trust by throwing out more money for housing, mortgages?
No, not at this time, Jack, although we are working on areas in which we can help ease the housing crunch, and one of those areas will be the announcement on the limitation of taxation, local taxation. Secondly, we have not interfered to my knowledge at least at this point, at the CRTC hearings. What we have done, though, Jack, is we've been trying to convince the federal government for years to turn over control of BC Tel to the province, and then we could intervene directly.
That's kind of
and they would have been covered under this spending restraint.
When you say limitations of public spending, you don't just mean, you mean permanent guidelines for the increase in the cost of municipal government and GVRDs, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster, regularly at my place of business I receive publications from the provincial government. One in point is the BC Industry and Small Business News, published by the Ministry of Industry and Small Business Development. Could Mr. McClelland tell me that these things are going to be cut, because they're absolutely useless to me as a small businessman, and it really frustrates me that I have to pay for them. Will these things be cut out of the budget?
There's a possibility. I don't think I'm sharing any confidences when I say that the Minister of Finance has been looking carefully at all our advertising and publication budgets in government, and he needs some money, and I would expect that some things will have to be cut out. I wouldn't pick one particular thing, but I'm sure that you'll see some restraint there.
Thank you. From Victoria, go ahead.
Yes, my questions are not to do with the inflation guidelines. Is it okay if I go ahead anyway?
Keep it short.
Okay. Well, the Social credit's policy lately regarding housing is to help people with mortgage payments. And what about people on welfare?
I don't know what the question is. We are committed to a program of help for people who are in need of help, and that program is regularly improved and has been over the years. I'm not sure what you want me to say other than that.
Well, he's in a position where he's not going to be affected by the guidelines because he hasn't got a job.
Well,
and your government must take some share of the national inflationary crisis.
Sure, we're not putting all of the blame on the national government, although the Premier made it quite clear the effect that the horrendous federal deficit has on each of us as taxpayers last night in his speech. No, I don't blame everything on the federal government. Each government in Canada, and a lot of us as individuals, have to take some of that blame as well.
Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Go ahead, please.
A question and an observation, Jack, and then I'll hang up for my answer.
Right.
Mr. McClelland, do you honestly think you're worth $78,000 a year when people like me are sitting home?
Sir, I don't apologize for the wages I'm paid. I'm sitting in front of a fellow that makes an awful lot of money.
Nothing to do with it. I'm not in the public trough.
Jack, I don't consider myself to be in the public trough either. I think each one of us gets what we can out of the work that we do, and I believe that I am worth the money that I make. I work long hours, and I don't have very much job security.
I've got a suggestion, Jack. This is my observation.
Mm-hmm.
All cabinet ministers cut their salaries by 25%. All MLAs by 15%. No free rides on Lear jets. Let them take commercial aircraft, and let's see how many people will run for office in the next election. Thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
Well, I think you'll always have people running for office. I think that, Jack, that you do need to make the public service an attractive place to work as well as the private sector. We are taking very major steps to control that spending, and we will continue to do that.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
That's you, ma'am.
Yes. Since the whole point of this cutback is to increase money, I presume, for other programs and so forth, why haven't they looked at the bank rates? I understand the Bank of British Columbia's profits last year went up over 90%, and so long as money is so expensive and interest rates are so high, how do we expect new development and job creation in this province? I'll hang up and listen for your answer.
Well, I wish that we'd have had that question first, because I think it's one of the most important ones. If we had the opportunity to move in and limit bank increases, I have no doubt that that would be our first and very most important priority. Unfortunately, our chartered banks in Canada are chartered by the national government, and we have absolutely no jurisdiction there. I think that the bank interest rates are almost criminal.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning. I think Mr. Bennett's move is a step in the right direction, and I have to give you my reasons for it in the form of an analogy and riddle. And that goes like this. A schoolmaster named Bill Bennett buys a freshly baked pie with his last bit of loose pocket change, and he slices it up for his pupils. After cutting it into 20 pieces, the teacher is suddenly faced with 5 extra mouths to feed when the principal, whose name is Pierre Elliott Trudeau, assigns him 5 new pupils from 10 other overburdened neighboring classrooms. What then is the schoolmaster to do? Distribute the original 20 slices of pie among the original 20 pupils that he bought it for, or give it an equal proportion to all 25 students by cutting the pie up into 25 smaller slices?
Well, I think you've hit the nail right on the head, and that's what the Premier said last night. It's better to have more unemployment and perhaps take a little bit less than to be sitting at home with no job.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, you put the wage controls on the public sector, hoping that the private sector will go along with this, but then what do you do about price controls?
Well, we've thought very seriously about what we did with price controls, ma'am, and simply it wouldn't work if we attempted to put price controls in at the provincial level. You could see that the horrible sort of competitive war we might have from Alberta, other provinces, perhaps neighboring United States, who could undercut those price controls that we put in and in fact compete with us in a very unfair way. We would hope that if there are to be price controls that the Prime Minister would consider it on a national basis. Well, I think it would be a disaster to do it in the province by itself.
Are there any indication any other provinces are going to follow you?
Well, there was a lot of discussion, I understand, at the First Minister's Conference, and I have a feeling, and that's just a feeling that I have, that somebody was waiting for somebody to drop the shoe, and there may be some, I would expect there might be some serious moves.
Yes, Jack?
Mm-hmm.
I am a government employee, and these wage controls have just made me sick. I bring home $10.70 a month, and with my mortgage now up to 18%, even cutting back on my food bill, I still can't, you know, keep my house. We've shown restraint for the last 3 years with 8, 8, and 8, and, you know, it's very upsetting.
Well, I'm sure it's upsetting, Jack, and I know why it's upsetting, but I guess I just have to go back to the same scenario I painted before, and that is that there is a very cruel way to deal with the inflationary times that we're in, and the private sector is feeling it very, very, very seriously. And that is that when those cutbacks come, there is no job available. And
Thank you.
I think this is the best way to handle it.
Anyway, it's
fairest.
effective now. The legislation is not yet passed. We don't know when the House is going to sit, but when the legislation is passed, it will apply as of last night.
Correct.
Confrontation?
No, I hope not, Jack. I think that responsible labor leaders in the province will see this as a necessary, fair, equitable, and honest move.
My thanks to Bob McClelland. You're bound to have a headache now. We'll cure it for you with Dr. Robert Kohlenberg, a clinical psychologist from Seattle, after the break. I'm one of those lucky people who doesn't suffer very often from headaches. And if I have a headache, it's usually my own stupidity. Dr. Robert Kohlenberg is a clinical psychologist from Seattle. And he's quite an expert, and I know that lots of people suffer from them, in migraine relief. Any headache's migraine.
No, see, you've never had a migraine headache, or else you wouldn't say that. There's a different quality to migraine headaches. And the one quality that makes it different, probably differentiates it from other headaches more than anything else, is its severity. They are so severe that it's difficult to understand how painful they are unless you've actually ever had one.
Bash your head in the wall, collapse on the floor.
Well, let's say to the point, that would give you maybe one sharp pain, but let's say a pain
No,
that
I'm
continues.
saying the effect of a migraine can be so bad that you lose control.
Oh yes, yes. And I think many, many migraine headache sufferers actually consider suicide, as the pain is so severe that this is the only way they can see getting some relief.
Can't a tension headache be as bad as a migraine headache?
A tension headache can be annoying and troublesome, but not as bad as a migraine headache.
Now, I know your concept is this biofeedback thing. Explain that to me.
Well, with migraine headaches, the cause of the headaches has to do with changes in the body, particularly with arteries supplying blood to the brain. And an approach to doing something about the headaches would be to voluntarily, that is, exercising some kind of self-control over these arteries. In order to do that, biofeedback can help.
Okay. Can we demonstrate, or at least show, if we have a camera close enough, what we're going to do now?
Sure.
This is a book called Migraine Relief, a personal treatment program by Robert J. Kohlenberg, Ph.D., including the biotic band. Please hold up one biotic band.
Here's the biotic band.
That's the biotic band. Okay, for the purposes of this exercise, I have a slight headache.
Okay. Well, actually, if it's slight headache, it's too late. You want to be doing this stuff that I'm going to show you how to do with this before you get the headache. And I don't want to convey the idea that this band all by itself is going to cure headaches, because there's a lot more that goes into it. Okay, what we're doing here is we're measuring temperature. And you notice the little squares measures the temperature of your finger. The temperature of your finger has to do with the amount of blood that's flowing through it. The amount of blood that's flowing through it has to do with how wide open the arteries are that supply blood to the finger. So if I want you to learn how to control the opening and closing of arteries, I can say to you, all right, Jack, I'd like you to make the temperature of this band increase. Can you do something about that now? Now look at, you're kind of right at the top here. 94. Can you make it go up to 96?
Can I make it up to 96?
Yeah. What you want to do now is open up the arteries supplying blood to your finger.
Relax. Make my mind go blank.
Well, I can't tell you how to do it. You have to kind of figure it out for yourself.
Finger get hot, finger get hot, finger get hot. Do as you're told, finger get hot. Stupid finger, finger get hot, finger get hot. Mind over matter.
How'd you do? Well, you got it going a little bit.
Did I really?
Which is really surprising. Well, you notice the square is now illuminated.
Oh yeah, mind over matter.
Right. Well, I don't want to oversimplify this.
And Yuri Geller, get out your old clocks and watches and stop them and they'll all begin to go. No.
Okay,
But I see that. If, in other words, if my finger was way down in the low range of 78, would I be dead?
No, you would not be dead. You would have arteries that are constricted. And if you were a migraine headache sufferer, it would mean that you're probably getting ready to have a headache.
Now, this is merely to indicate to yourself that you can do something about changing the temperature of your extremities.
Yes, that you can do something about opening and closing arteries, and that by having this feedback, you see, if I say to you, if this wasn't on your finger, and I said to you, okay, I want you to open up the arteries in your finger, you wouldn't have any idea if what you tried actually worked. Here you tried something, you said some things to yourself, and by looking at the band, you could see that it actually did work. That's the idea of feedback.
And you're telling me that if I go through this exercise, anywhere at any time, if I fear a headache coming on, I'm just really relaxing, am I not?
You really are relaxing. That's really what it's all about. And in particular, though, it's a kind of relaxation that's going to open up arteries and prevent this chain of events which eventually could lead to a migraine headache. Okay, now, and again, I have to emphasize, though, there's more to migraine headaches than
you
just
carry
this.
on. This is quite fascinating. You carry on. What is there more to the...
Okay.
I know that this is really...
This is one of the ways to do something about migraine headaches. They're very complicated, and the exact causes for a particular headache vary from time to time and vary from person to person. Okay, so one of the things that I think it's real important for a migraine patient to learn how to do is to do this thing that you just did, to get very good at it, practice it regularly. Dietary factors are also important.
You mean allergies?
Allergy is one type of diet that definitely can influence people. It's very common, for example, to have a milk or wheat allergy, and this could be a contributor to a headache. That's the other thing. A given headache may have 4 or 5 things operating at one time. When they all occur together, bang, the headache happens. If one alone occurs, the headache may not happen.
Obviously, anyone with severe headache problems should have allergy tests.
Well, I don't even know if I want to go that far quite yet. I would say there's some things they should consider and then maybe have some allergy tests.
Now, how do you apply this technique? Do you apply it en masse to people or on an individual basis?
I originally used to all be on an individual basis. I would end up with a patient, I would sit an hour with them, an hour and a half with them, once or twice a week for 10 or 12 weeks. Eventually, what I found that I could do is I can actually teach patients to do this in a classroom setting. And it's a very unusual way to deal with migraine headaches.
What do you run in Seattle?
I really don't run anything. I'm a professor at the University of Washington.
Oh, you're not even in it for the bucks.
No. Well, maybe a little tiny bit would be okay. Yeah, but I'm a professor and I'm a researcher in this area.
Yeah, and there has been a proven success in this biofeedback. Is there no mechanical way you can create biofeedback in me?
No, you have to do it yourself. You need the feedback, you have to see what's happening, and then you just have to experiment and practice on a regular basis. Now, I want to point out, what you did just now is a first step. What I'd want you to do is to practice it like 4 or 5 times a day for the next couple of weeks, so I could say to you, Jack, first of all, what's the temperature of your finger without even looking at that band? Yeah. And you'd say, oh, I'm running about 82 right now. I'd say, okay, can you bring it up to 88? And you go like that and be able to do it. And again, that takes practice.
Now, don't let me oversimplify it, but if I can achieve this biofeedback and raise the temperature of my fingers, I'm removing blood from restricted areas, perhaps in my head, and spreading it more evenly throughout my body.
Well,
am I?
Well, not exactly.
I'm always looking for simple answers.
Right. What you're doing is, when you're doing that, at the same time, the arteries that supply blood to your brain are also opening up. It's just because we're built that way, okay? It's just the way we're constructed. And when the arteries to the brain are opening up, that prevents the first step of a migraine headache from happening. See, because the first step is constriction.
Supposing I put my hands in a bowl of hot water.
Won't particularly do anything for you because the headaches don't occur in the hands.
Listen,
okay?
I've been given a note here that you're going to hold a seminar when?
It's going to be on the 13th of March at UBC.
UBC? 13th of March. And there are some people standing by to take calls about this.
Yes.
I see here at UBC 228-2181, continuing education. And there are 3 people standing by to take calls. And if they call that, they can make arrangements to become involved in this and go to your seminar.
Yes. Yes.
On March the 13th, you say?
Yes.
13th. All-day seminar.
Yes. Am I right, March the 13th?
No, I said here March the 3rd. Let's get that right. 13th.
13th, okay.
9 to 4 p.m. at UBC, migraine relief. Well, let's take some calls from headache sufferers.
Okay.
Eh? Let's do that. After the break. Go ahead to Dr. Kohlenberg.
Thank you. Good morning. I have suffered with migraine for many, many years now. I'm now into my 60s, and I find they are decreasing, but they were very violent while I had them. Is it a hereditary thing? I tuned into your program kind of late.
Okay, is it hereditary?
Pretty much. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't do things about it, but it really does tend to pass on in families. And by the way, the pattern that this woman mentioned, and that is that they tend to go away with age, also is generally true. However, with these headaches, any rule I come up with, there's lots and lots of exceptions. For some people, they come on when they're older or get worse as they get older.
And another thing, now my daughter, I have one older daughter. Is it the eldest one in the family that suffers? It seems to me that she has it now. And the one occasion is when she went into a large store, they have the neon strip lighting. It seems to affect her, and she gets a migraine then, and it's very, very severe.
Interesting point. Eldest daughter?
Uh-huh.
Would that be a pattern?
A definite. Well, they tend to be, if a parent has headaches, there's about a 40% chance that the child's going to have them. If both parents have headaches, it's about an 80% chance.
And would the neon strip lighting have anything to do with it at all?
For some people, it brings it on. And that's the story with these migraine headaches. There are triggers that are unique for individuals.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that woman answered one of my questions there about hereditary. I suffer from it myself, but my youngest daughter also does. Now, she's taken Firanol for him. She's also been taking allergy shots for a couple of years. Now, the question I want to know, does thick hair have anything to do with it?
Thick hair?
I've never heard any connection between thick hair and headaches.
No, the reason why I was asking that is because once in a while when I get the headaches there, I get a haircut, and after that I don't have any until my hair grows again.
Never heard it. Now, you know, it sounds unusual, but there are such unique patterns, it's very possible that that's one of the contributors in headaches for this person.
Do you still suffer from them, sir?
Yeah, when my hair gets thick, yes.
Isn't that funny? Are you going to go to the seminar?
I was thinking of it myself. See, my daughter also has thick...
What does it cost the seminar? I forgot to ask you.
I think about $100, but I'm not sure. They probably can get that when they call up.
That's why it's, 228-2181 for information. Thanks, old boy. Keep your hair short.
I will.
Okay, boy.
Thanks.
You know my cure for a headache?
Pardon?
My cure for a headache, it's
Yes.
a kind of biofeedback. If I have a bad headache, which I have occasionally, I go into a shower and I run the water as hot as I can on my head on the theory that the bones in my big head expand and the blood can move smoother.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Actually, there are some people that are helped, migraine headache sufferers that are helped by, actually, it's a hot shower and then a cold shower. And I'm not recommending that people try that because it can be quite a jolt to the vascular
What about
system.
the finger puncture?
Well, that will actually give a temporary relief of pain. Again, I don't recommend doing that because what you're doing is cutting off circulation. That's an artery that you're collapsing there, and you don't want to do that.
Easiest way out is a couple of 292s.
For some people, it's helpful. The trouble is with medication, particularly with pain-relieving medication, you habituate to it, you start increasing the dose, and it ends up in a circle, a vicious circle that's difficult to get out of.
Don't you get mad at some of these commercials that say the 4 little things, and one says, not 60 grains, not 70 grains, not 80 grains, but 90 grains. 90 grains of what is what makes the difference.
Right.
You want a break? Dash you. Gosh, you're a better program than the cabinet minister. Take it from me, and I'm an old expert. After the break. Dr. Robert Kohlenberg is a clinical psychologist and professor at which university?
University of Washington.
That's in Seattle.
In Seattle,
You've got so many little places down there, one never knows. And we're talking about migraine headaches and about the seminar on March the 13th at UBC. Cost you $1. I'll let you know how much it is when we find out. You think it's $100?
I'm not sure. I think it's around
something
that.
For a full day. Go ahead, please, to Dr. Kohlenberg.
Hello. I suffer from migraine headaches only when I'm pregnant. And you can't take anything when you're pregnant.
Yes, yes. Well, one of the, since the approach that I use is compatible with medication but doesn't involve medication, it really lends itself to individuals who really are looking for treatments that do not require a medication approach to it. It is not unusual for pregnancy to affect migraine headaches because the hormonal cycle really has a lot to do with one of the causal factors. Remember I mentioned that there's many things operating at one time that can lead to a headache, and hormonal swings can be one of these factors. Now, the more typical pattern is not like yours. The more typical pattern is during the 2nd and 3rd trimesters of pregnancy, the headaches will disappear. So yours is kind of the opposite of typically what goes on.
It's just like having morning sickness but getting a headache instead, right?
Yes, yeah, and they are awful headaches. It's unfortunate that you have them. But again, the kinds of approaches that we will tend to get into are dietary approaches, relaxation-based approaches, how not to overreact to things, learning about the physiology and biochemistry of these things so you have a good understanding of what can be done to prevent them from occurring.
What do you mean, how not to overreact? I thought, and my wife accuses me of this all the time, of not having headaches because I can flip my lid at a moment's notice.
I guess that might be okay, but you may not have to flip your lid necessarily if you reacted in a more reasonable way to some things. I don't know how you react to things.
Pretty extravagantly. Pretty extravagantly.
Would drinking water help it at all?
Not that I know of, but again, every individual will have some unique features, and if you found that drinking water is helpful, fine, I think that you should use that, but that's not a general treatment approach.
Oh, because I thought if you're drinking water, your brain's lacking something, so you need the water to help it if you get a headache.
Now, again, there's no theory, I think, to relate that together. But again, if it's useful for you, I think that you should proceed with that.
It's always a good thing to drink lots of water.
Well, thank you very much, and I really enjoy the show.
And before you go, the seminar is $120 all day at UBC on March 13th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. My husband suffers from cluster headaches, sometimes called pic-de-la-rue. Do you think there could be any hope that this would help?
We've had, I'd say about 5% of the patients that have taken this seminar have suffered from that type of headache. And it's a curious type of headache, Jack, in that the headaches tend to occur in clusters. So, for example, a patient may have daily severe headaches for, let's say, 3 months. And then they'll go away, and sometimes they may go away for years. So I can't tell you if my seminar actually helps people with this kind of syndrome, because their headaches tend to go away, but it could have been that they would have gone away anyways. But I am collecting follow-up data on all of the patients that go through the seminar. And I've been doing these now for about 2 years, so I don't have enough data yet to say for sure this is good for cluster.
But it might help.
But it definitely might help because the headache themselves are caused by the same vascular changes that are believed to operate in migraine. So, you know, I think that given the treatment alternatives, which there aren't too many except for some medications, and by the way, if anybody that gets these kinds of headaches have not seen their doctor, they should do so immediately for two reasons. First of all, to make sure what the headaches are caused by. Just because it's a severe headache doesn't mean it's a migraine. And second of all, there are some very good medications and some new ones that are very effective and definitely should be tried. So I'm saying, but if you have done that and you have not found adequate relief, then I think this is a very reasonable thing to try.
Yeah, you're a very impressive character, Dr. Kohlenberg, and praise from me to a psychologist and a professional man is praise indeed. Go ahead, please. And I'm not going to flip my lid. Go ahead, please. Oh, no. How are we doing, Freddie?
Yes, I've had migraine headaches.
Are we out?
Hello?
Well, I'm terribly sorry, my dear. I've got to chop the program. My thanks to Dr. Kohlenberg. Phone 228-2181 for information about the help for migraine relief. Right?
Right.
Again, thanks, Doctor. Best of luck.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I'll be back after the break. It was a very good week. I enjoyed it thoroughly. Some weeks are pretty miserable in this job, but this week was a good week. So good, well, you know, so good that it was one occasion, before 9 a.m. Monday precisely, that I shall burst into song for you. What about a wee song?
A wee song? Oh, that's out the question.
No, give me a wee song.
You sing I Belong to Glasgow first.
Oh, and then we went into another, and that is the reason I'm full.
Oh,
We
you're
had
awful good at it.
Two Doch and Dorises, then sang some choruses. Listen, I'll sing one to you. Join in me.
Oh, I'm no awardee.
Bide a war. Oh, I'm no awardee, leave ye. Oh, I'm no awardee, bide a war. I'll I come back and see.
Good for you. You're wasting your talent in that show.
Here, here.
You know that? You should have been on the hit parade or the telephone.